the key of the matter of when does research actually translate to change in policy? And I think Excel said life is messy. I would say research is messy as well. And charting how research turns into policy change is really, sometimes frustrating, sometimes challenging. And I think Maureen had this, or maybe it was Excel had this triangle of you needed political support. You needed to be on the ground floor, and you needed credible research. And it's rare for all those things to line up. It does happen, and there's some stories. One example I give as well, and maybe talk later on application assistance to fill out for financial aid. Some of the work that I and others have been doing on trying to simplify the process of getting through the application to post-secondary seems to have attracted a lot of attention and interest in simplifying or making the transition to post-secondary easier. But there are other examples, but they're not as many as we'd like. Okay, so I think I've got 5 minutes or less. So I'm going to, this is great, thank you for having me, and I'm going to echo a lot of points that Maureen made, maybe a bit more on the academic side. And so I thought I'd give you a little bit of a case study in trying to work with Pathways to Education to try to do some research. Many of you know that this organization was a grassroots organization that started in, the program was implemented in 2001 at Regent Park, which is not too far from here. It's the largest housing project in the country. And the purpose was to try to break the cycle of poverty, and was motivated by, it was started at the Community Health Organization. They managed to raise some money from the Trillium Foundation, and had the luxury to really think about introducing a very integrated, complete, expensive program to try to see if they could help disadvantaged youth, especially through high school. So very briefly, the program starts for people entering grade 9, and they get a very integrated set of programs. Anyone who lives in Regent Park and now other projects entering grade 9 is eligible for the program. It's voluntary. They have to sign a form to commit to the program. The parents sign a form as well. And then if they do that, they get assigned a student support worker that meets with them about every 2 weeks and helps guide them throughout their high school time in high school. And then they also get tutoring up to 4 nights a week, and tutoring is supposed to be mandatory up to 2 times a week. On top of that, there's a whole set of social support. There's monthly or bi-monthly group activities, including issues around stress management or just going to a sporting event. And then there's financial support in the terms of free public transportation, and also a post-secondary scholarship that's $4,000. So it's a very integrated approach. You probably know about Pathways because of this report that came out in 2007 by the Boston Consulting Group. And at the very bottom here, they have that before Pathways from Regent Park, the dropout rate was 56%, the high school dropout rate. After Pathways, it was 10% for 80% reduction. And David Pico, who had the study, was on the consulting firm. He was also on the Pathways board of directors. He said, this is the highest rate of turn that we've ever seen. Now, this change is off the charts, and it's we don't see these kind of impacts in education programs almost anywhere. And so to kind of have that kind of impact and say this is what Pathway is doing, it certainly asks for further research. So anyone seeing this, doing research in education gets really excited, but also, naturally skeptical, wanting to kind of understand whether this is real. If it is real, how is it happening? And so Pathways got a lot of attention from this, and they managed to, expand it and go national on it. But this kind of program and the research related to trying to evaluate shouldn't stop there. And it is worthwhile to try to have others try to look at the program from a different perspective, maybe a different methodology, and it is healthy to have a dialogue and discussion on whether this is the truth. And I think that's where academics can come and help, but also there's some tension that sometimes comes with that, because from the organization's point of view, this result is, is enough to, is in the direction that they want to see. This slide is similar to Maureen's in terms of like, well, what's in it for organizations to kind of have more academics play, a role in trying to evaluate the program. I think she said there's some incentive. There seems to be some impression that if the research is only done internally, there's feathering one's own nest, right? And one advantage, if for to have additional multiple investigations of the program, is you can have arm's length interest for looking at it. This brings credibility, also brings alternative perspectives, and we're cheap too. Sometimes we're more interested in, we're happy to kind of participate and look at it for the sake of science, you don't have to pay us consulting fees. Sometimes we have emphasis on causal inference, trying to understand what is the counterfactual, what's the comparison group, trying to understand and evaluate the program. And we might be able to have bring more time to the investigation. Often the organizations themselves are very busy operating the program, and the capacity to do detailed research is limited, so we can do that. And the last one, I don't know if you guys seen down here, is just more and more funders want it. Funders want to see sort of some external type of evaluation, and so that's another reason. Of course, the other reason not to want this is that, well, we might find results that disappoint the organization, and there's very little often incentive for an organization to welcome researchers in when they have a strong support for the program already, and also it's important as an academic to be able to state what you think the conclusions of your own research are. And it's important to have a dialogue with the organization prior, to talking about the research. But, no academic wants to be in a situation to have, a filter from the organization what you're able to say. And so it's important to have a non-filtered presentation of results that can also stand up to scrutiny, and sometimes the organizations are nervous about that. Sometimes, in order to do the research, the operations may actually need to be changed or flexible in order to accommodate evaluation. And this is often easier said than done. There's different methodologies. It was discussed earlier that sometimes there's a methodology hierarchy, and that exists for a reason. Often if you're able to set up a randomized controlled trial, you have a credible comparison group, more credible than anything else you can produce, and at least on an aggregate level, in very specific contexts, you're able to tell what would have happened in the absence of treatment or in the accident program. Sometimes these things can be set up easier than others, and sometimes they're not easily set up, but trying to accommodate the research to set up a comparison group is extremely useful, and we learn a lot from it, but often it might require change. We still need the qualitative research as well, but to really understand the bigger picture, it helps a lot to have a credible comparison group. One small example is the Big Brothers Big Sisters study, that they had a long lineup of people who wanted to be a big brother and big sister, and they took advantage of that lineup. And rather than going in order, they took a series of people and they said, would you be okay with selecting at random from the lineup who gets a bigger sister, big brother quicker? And from that, they were able to assess the program. So in the pathways example, it took me 3 years to sort of establish the relationship, to kind of say I didn't have an ideology. I really wanted to know whether this was real and wanted to see whether this program was going. And it took a long time because there was reluctance and concern. You almost have nowhere to go but down in terms of once you have a 56% to 10% result. And to be honest, it helped that most of my analysis, it took a while to realize this, could come from data from outside pathways. And I think from that, and also just a lot of goodwill and sitting down with them, it establishes relationships. So very quickly, it actually does turn out that Pathways has a very high participation rate. So within 2 years of the program, these red bars show that in Regent Park, participation goes up above 80%. And of all the people who could be participating in Pathways, you've got 85, 90% of people volunteering for the program, which is very high take-up. And the other lines are for the other sites, Lawrence Heights and Rexdale, that were introduced in 2007. Also, almost immediately, participation rates are really high. And so the way that this study was set up, we can't randomize who's in Pathways, but what we have is people from other housing projects, and this shows the enrollment rate in post-secondary after 5 years since starting grade 9. And I show you, for those who start in grade 9, starting in 2000 or 2001 all the way up to 2009, what the post-secondary enrollment rates are over time. So you see them edging up around 30%. And so the orange dot is what it was for Regent Park for 2000 before Pathways was introduced. And so without the absence of the program, the comparison group is to sort of follow this line and say that's probably what would have happened, or that's our best guess of what would happen. So when you actually go to the data, look at Regent Park, you actually do see a fairly substantial rise in post-secondary enrollment. In fact, if you normalize this, if you kind of put these back together, the gap that opens up almost exactly the time that Pathway was introduced was a very large rise. And so it turns out with the data that I was obtaining, that my best guess of this impact for Regent Park was almost a 19 percentage point increase in post-secondary enrollment, which is also off the chart, which is very encouraging. So when you go look at the other sites that were introduced in 2007, instead of this 19 percentage point, you have a much lower estimated impact, a 3.5 percentage point increase in enrollment. Although if you focus on just college, you get a 6.5 percentage point increase in community college enrollment, which is still generally impressive. But if you go back and you report these results to Pathways and others, generally the reaction is mixed. There's sort of some disappointment that I wasn't able to show the 56%, this giant increase. But from that work, there's ongoing qualitative work to try to understand what's going on, the mechanisms that's going on there. And and so I've had to team up with some people doing qualitative work to try to get down. And I have to say also that from an academic, to really get on the ground floor to work with these people on sites, it is a pleasure. It is, because you get some idea of all the effort and the messiness going on the ground floor that needs to be appreciated, that you don't when you're doing, when you're just showing those figures. So I think the combination of the research is important. And from that, you learn stuff like the attendance for the tutoring and meeting the coaches is actually not that high, or not as high as they would say it is from the the rules of the program. So one of the things that we're trying to explore now is to try to find ways to increase attendance, to see within the program whether that actually would make it improve. So it's not just about the evaluation of the program as a whole, but how things could be improved internally. So one thing we're looking at is texting to provide more salient reminders, sending messages on the day that tutoring could be occurring to encourage participation. And a big advantage of the texting is that it's cheap and you can randomize who you text to. And so we have a comparison group to explore how participation changes and whether through whether this mechanism can increase participation and get more people to the tutoring and the coaching. So I know I'm out of time, so let me just kind of summarize it at there is, there's a need to work together. It often requires sort of respectful, open-minded relations. And so as an academic, you have to realize that, you can't just trounce in and say you're doing it all wrong. You have to really understand where they're coming from, but also, be really open minded and also encourage scrutiny. Scrutiny is healthy. Trying to understand the truth, what works to make things better, because we are, related in trying to improve well-being, especially for some of these disadvantaged families. And I think there's lots of room to try to do that together. Okay, thanks.
So we'll open it up to a few questions, but I first of all want to say that was fascinating. And I really want to acknowledge you for sticking with it for 3 years and generating that enough goodwill, because I can imagine how important that was to be able to offer what sounds like has been very useful data for program improvement and deepening and enhancing the outcomes that they're able to generate. And I'm sure that wasn't easy. And lots of, I think, richness in this question, and I think as you framed it about accepting negative data, being willing to sort of embrace potentially things that aren't working in the spirit of being able to make sure you're allocating those resources in a way that could have more impact, and this idea of ongoing research and implementing diverse methodologies, I think has a lot of important value. So just to pull out a few things, let me turn it over to you. Who's got any questions for Philip? Yeah. Okay. Any new hands? Will come. Okay. Go ahead. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Bill with St. Stephen's Community House. I'm doing some youth research as well right now, so I'm very interested in your thoughts about text messaging. And I know you were hurrying at the end. Like, text messaging is a good way to send information to youth. Are you finding it a good way to collect information from youth?
There are different possibilities with text. Maureen brought up behavioral insights. There's a lot of, and it was great to hear that people are thinking about, behavioral economics on this stuff. There's a lot of interesting theories behind why texting, both pushing out messages and kind of receiving messages, might be very helpful. Pushing out is the issues around, just providing salient reminders at the time that you might take action often leads to a higher likelihood of actually doing that action. But receiving messages also really opens up a line of communication that we've never really had before. It's a really cheap way of having students or individuals feel that they can reach out with someone at any time during the day, at a time when something pops up in their head where they don't have to sort of then set up a schedule or meeting. And so one project I have right now is with first-year undergraduates, where when we send messages, they can respond to us. And often the message themselves, when you send something, is a reminder that they can send a message back, and that's when we get the most communication. And this research is ongoing, but the sense is that the students who do respond really appreciate the line of communication of being able to talk to a faculty member at 9 o'clock at night. It goes to me sometimes. Or a graduate student or someone, that there doesn't need to be a pause between the idea that comes to head and a need to communicate. So I think texting is a new technology that we're only now becoming aware that it might be an effective addition to some of the programs, the way that we're implementing the programs. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, thank you.
more from you. You said at the beginning, academics are great partners sometimes because you're committed to the work, you have the skills to do the work, and you're cheap. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more for lots of different reasons. But one of them, you know, you're cheap sometimes, but not always. When we have tenders going out for different research projects, for example, if we get bids from academic teams, we often have to, they have to submit their bids with these large management fees from the institutions. But what are the different options for relationships for community organizations with academics to do the work, the kind of work you're doing on program improvement, the kind of work we might need on other kinds of research that we might want to be doing? And how do we all get to know about the different routes into building those relationships and taking advantage of the cheapness sometimes? Yeah,
sure. That's a good question. I mean, the Pathways is an example where, this project was done on no money. The money for doing the qualitative study is picking up, but the data was made available part from Pathways, part from TSB for free. And the interest in sort of a young academic wanting to understand a project that seemed quite attractive, the interest or incentive for me was to understand this program a little bit better and have the opportunity to share results of the research. So, often the chance to publish, but publish also means disseminate and discuss and share ideas. The chance to do that is often more valuable than being paid. Sometimes the research involves hiring research assistants and other things, but that's part of what we do, and we raise money for that. So I've often thought that sometimes when these calls for proposals for research, it's possible to direct attention or try to find academics who are genuinely interested in this area that might be interested in working with data sets that they would not have normally access through these kind of partners, and be interested. The one thing I would say is, as long as it helps a lot if there's a long time period between putting together a proposal. So often you will get these requests saying there's a lot of money available if you submit a proposal in 2 weeks, and it's just not enough time to drop everything and kind of really think about that. So maybe there's a trade-off, but my suspicion is that there is more possibilities in bringing on academics that are willing or more interested in the research than getting paid to as long as they had more space to fit it in.
Yeah, and I think reminds me of something else I was thinking about earlier. There's some mutuality in that as well. We need the time to build the relationships between the academic and the community organization and partners. But it's similar. We often get requests, and I know many of the agencies get requests to be part of different SHRC or other Tri-Council grant applications 3 days before the application is due. And that, to me, is kind of the other side of that too, and how we better build some understanding on the need for having lead-up time and time to build relationships, to learn to work together and take advantage of both the opportunities that we offer each other. So I really appreciate your comments, Phil.
Did I see another hand over here? Oh wait, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Diane Dyson from Wood Green, and really followed your research a long time, so really glad to hear you speak to this. And you're speaking about pathways to education, which is one of my longtime areas of interest, as well as looking, like you, how do we improve the outcomes for young people in education. And so I have all sorts of methodological questions that I wanted to sort of get into with you, but I think for the use of the room, what might be more interesting is that one of the shifts that happened in Pathways to Education is after it moved out of Regent Park and it moved into other neighborhoods and across Canada, it was able to do that because it had the external validity of a Boston Consulting evaluation that said this is the return on dollar. It was something like $14 or $18, quite an incredible number when you look at other SROIs. And so they were able to do that. And then when they moved into the other places, you've noted and shown us today that their outcomes were not as good. I'm wondering if that was then perhaps the burden is on us as community groups, should that happen to us, that we need to make sure that we've got the inside the program evaluation knowing well enough so we know whether text messages work, whether we know whether the counseling or the attendance work, those sorts of things, that we have to make sure that we've paid enough attention to the internal processes so that there's some fidelity when we go to when we try to scale up our programs.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's hard to scale up and replicate what seems to be working. There's a little bit of sort of a scale-up bias, where you find a study that, or some initial program looks like it's working amazingly well, and then there could be a lot of luck involved in that, or a particular champion behind the program that's really hard to pinpoint or get a finger on what's driving that. And so when you expand it, it is more often than not that when you look at the evaluation of the expansion projects, they're not as as striking. But I do think another reason could be that the initial results were not as there's some noise around your estimates on the impact of the program. Maybe it wasn't as effective to begin with. But I was thinking, it is worth noting that Pathways, is a promising program. It looks like it has a lot of ingredients and would not have expanded were it not for that study, right? And were it not for them, problems aside, the program would not have, probably taken up beyond Regent Park. If it was just some academic coming up with a published academic paper with just my report, I doubt it would have the same kind of impact. So it is sort of important that they had that report that came out at the same time. But I agree with you that trying to understand the mechanisms, both at Regent Park and the expansion sites, to be open to constant change and tweaking is healthy, to constantly try to improve on it.
Yeah, great point. And it sounds like one around scaling in general, around this tension between fidelity to a model versus adaptation to a new context or environment that I think was, in Pathways' case, sounds like an important consideration. Okay, we're going to take a break right about now. And I've shortchanged some of the questions at this point. Let's open it up to if we have any last question. Did you have one? Okay, if we have any last question, and then we'll break and move to the breakouts. Any final? Yeah, please.
Well, I don't really have a question, but I wanted to say that sitting as in a community-based organization, and admire the fact that other organizations have been able to create opportunities to do research. One of the things that I find really difficult about it is that we kind of have to piggyback on existing projects because there are no resources. So when you talk about engagement, and you were talking before about engaging with the academics and the community members before and so on, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, when am I going to get the time? And who in my organization can I say, okay, stop doing what you're doing, the thing you were talking about, units, and we have numbers to meet, we have those kinds of things to meet. That's right. And so the reality of being able to do this is very, very difficult from where we sit. Now, I think it's really important because the credibility factor is not only in the credibility of the research and the outcomes, but it is really being able to demonstrate as community organizations that we are doing something that is impactful, that is meaningful, that is important, and that is based on evidence and based on, and we have very good support from people in the academic community, wherever. We need that credibility on our level to keep doing our work. So it's just striking me as a whole other, like we could open the Warden Woods research arm in order to support all of the issues and types of things that we're dealing with as a multi-service organization. So it's necessary. We're trying, but I'm just overwhelmed with how we're going to do it off the side of our desks with everything else.
Lots of nodding heads. There were lots of nodding heads to that comment. Yes, yes. And the good news is we have some funders in the room to hear that. But it sounds like it's a bigger problem and question. Yeah, you want to respond to that, Phil?
Yeah, just one thought, because like as a quick and dirty way to maybe get up and running. I mean, there are lots of better ways to do this, but just letting researchers at universities interested in community work or qualitative work that have done, have similar interests, letting them know that you're interested in having, your organization, your program evaluated or looked at, might spark interest in them getting involved without taking up a lot of your time. Like saying, I'm open to you coming in and looking at our data and giving you access to speaking with people. That's often really attractive for, especially young academics looking for new ideas and topics that would not otherwise be available to them. So that might be a quick thing to do.
Okay, well, let's do one last one, and we'll still give you your break, and we'll just have a little less time for discussion at the tail end. Yeah.
Thanks, John Carey, Settlement Assistant, Family Support Services. But I'm going to talk mostly on my child development years, Child Development Institute. I think the first question I'm looking for answers right now is, why do we want to do the research? Because I've heard many different reasons. I think we owe it to our clients to show that what we're doing is effective. Second thing is, if we incorporate the research into what we're already doing, helps deal with the issue of adding on to. So somehow it's finding that partnership to do that. And we're starting to get involved in a study with violence against women, and it just happens to, stars align, I don't know what you want to call it, but there's someone that came to us and said, we're interested in exploring this issue. And we said, well, we have the women that can answer some of your questions to start on a qualitative note. So if it's incorporated to something that you're already doing, I would see that it's a lot easier process rather than trying to make it work. Thanks.
Great. Okay. I think both really important points. And the why question, I do encourage you in your groups to spend some time talking about, because I think we've heard that there's different whys for the researchers, for the organizations, for funders. How can you increasingly generate that kind of alignment around the whys, which sounds like is where some of the real value is going to come, or at least possibility. Okay, so I've got some instructions for the breakouts. You have